Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome again to the Radical Edge of HR. And I'm your host, Tanya Hawley. So happy to be with you once again this afternoon. So, we are about to tackle another great topic. Today's special topic is pushing the envelope in diversity. So I know you all are on the edge of your seats with that, and we want you to be. So let me go ahead and introduce you to our special guests that are going to cover this today. And of course, we have our wonderful CEO and founder of HRKS, Miss Cherie Knowles. Hello, Cherie.
Hello, Tanya. How are you?
I am fantastic now that you're here, and I'm going to be even better in just a second as I introduce our second guest today, which is Miss Jo Weech. Welcome, Jo. Hello.
Hello. Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you so much for joining us. If you both don't mind, if you could just introduce yourself and tell a little bit about yourself for our audience. And I'll let our guests go first, if that's okay, Cherie.
Absolutely.
Jo?
Okay, well, I am just really both humbled and honored to be able to participate in this conversation today. As someone who is biracial but doesn't have any appearance of it whatsoever, I have had interesting challenges, from grade school all the way to present day in terms of, different types of biases that do exist, and so I'm always loving conversations where we can inform, educate, and inspire.
Great. Thank you so much, Jo. Welcome again, and thank you for joining us. And Cherie, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Sure. Thanks, Tanya. And Joe, welcome. It is a pleasure to be hanging out with you this afternoon. My name is Cherie Knowles, and I spent about 20 plus years in corporate America before I came out and founded HRKS. And my experience, oftentimes as the only Black female in a senior leader or executive position, was one of having to think about macro aggressions in terms of policies and procedures and things that we were implementing with our employees. But personally, I also experienced microaggressions, aggressions toward me, often feeling like maybe a purple unicorn, not quite a fit in the right environment. So I'm thrilled to be here to really talk about this topic.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cherie. So, ladies, let's talk diversity. So, the first thing we want to talk about is diversity initiatives. So, there's a lot of companies out there that say they value diversity and say they're doing a lot of things, or at least they think they're doing a lot of things, but the employees just don't see it that way. So, why the disconnect? Why aren't there diversity programs working? Can you touch on that? Whoever would like to go first? Should we let our guests?
Sure.
Jo, if you want to touch on that first, please.
Well, I think that it's interesting that it's always been an issue, right? And yet, when things happen in 2020, starting with George Floyd and the rest of that summer, it, for whatever reason, brought people awake. They like to say woke, but I don't know that they're clearly woke. They just awakened to this. And so they decided that, they went on a mass hiring spree, to hire people that would, lead the charge on diversity and that sort of thing. But the problem is that they're really not funding the things that need to happen. So I actually just interviewed with a company today, and the person was telling me that they have an entire team that has been, assembled in the last 2 years, but the things that they need to do, they're not being funded, to do those things. So this is why there's a disconnect, and the reason why that it's not working. Also, if it's not top down, then really people are not going to be empowered to make forward progress.
That's great. Thank you for that, Jo. Cherie, you want to piggyback? I do want to say one thing, and we had kind of talked about this before. When you all are talking about how everybody's scrambling and, George Floyd happened and everybody's diving in, it's almost, in my mind, I feel like a life jacket is being thrown. Okay, I know you're drowning. I'm going to throw you the life jacket. And they scramble. The life jacket is the diversity team or the person. Mm-hmm. And then what?
Right.
So they're still in the water, and they're still,
sharks in the water. Yeah. Let's call it what it is.
Yeah, the sharks are there, and who knows what else, and you're going to get stung by the stingrays, and all that stuff's going on. Mm-hmm. So that's how I kind of visualize that. So what can they do? What can companies do to make sure that diversity initiatives have a positive impact. Cherie, if you want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Joe, about this massive response to the awakening, as we'll call it. And I really believe companies want to and wanted even then to do the right thing, but they were chasing behind the train, right? Instead of being proactive and in
Mhm.
front of it. And wanting, in some cases, to check the box, right? They wanted to companies are all about solving problems, right? They solve problems for their customers and their consumers with their products and services. They treated this very much like that. They just want to throw some resources at it. Um, Create a mission statement, a diversity statement, check the box, provide some training, and move forward because in their mind, they've solved the issue.
Mhm.
That doesn't work when we're talking about people, culture, and the way people are treated, things that are said, things that are done, and things that are not said and not done. So that's part of the issue. And the way companies can really reimagine this, Tanya and Joe, to think about it differently is to be intentional. Step back for a moment and say, what's our stance on diversity and inclusion and equity and belonging? Like, where do we want to plant our flag as an organization? And then say, okay, where we want to go is here. Where we are now is kind of way back there. How do we bridge that gap with things that are
Mhm.
meaningful, not just to the senior executives that may look good on the website, but meaningful to the staff, to the employees, and meaningful to the leaders who actually have to carry it out? So stepping back, pausing, taking a beat for a moment, and then reimagining how they want to show up for their staff. Joe, you talked about funding. I can't tell you how many diversity professionals that I've talked to, experts in their field, who have these amazing jobs but are frustrated because they don't
Mhm.
have the top down support. They don't have a great budget to implement the programs. When they're talking about programs and trying to present like a business case for them, people are looking at them like they have three heads, right? And nobody's hearing them. So that's part of what companies can do.
That's great. Cherie, I have a question. You made me think of something. You said it's like they were chasing after the train or the
Yes.
bus. So
Yes.
they're chasing after something.
Yeah.
So how can
All of it.
they? So how can they get in front of the train or bus instead of they keep because it's like they're playing catch up. How can they get in front of it because they're chasing it? If they haven't caught up yet, it's almost being in that water, treading water. How can they now get in front of it?
So the question is, when you want to know what's meaningful to people and what's going to have a great impact, you ask them.
Mm,
And a very quick survey, it doesn't have to be fancy or expensive, but if you ask people what's important to them from a DIBE perspective, diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, they'll tell you. And then you can build programs around that. So that's the way you get in front of
mm,
it. You try to pause the train long enough to step back and ask those questions.
thank you. Thank you. That's great. And it sounds so simple. People sometimes I think we make things complicated.
So you know what? This is funny. I was in a meeting just like right before this one, and we were talking about uh, diversity and companies' responses to these surveys. And you're going to hear stuff that you don't like. You're going to hear stuff that
Mm,
scratches you or that stretches you. And that's a part of it. So I think it is simple. It's not complex, but sometimes companies don't want to ask because they really don't want to know or hear that
mm,
it's not
that's
perfect.
good. Yeah.
Or if they hear it, they have no idea what to do with it, right? Like, you give me this stuff, but
Mm,
now what? What do I do with it?
right.
So I think that's where the complexity comes in.
Yeah. Simple but not easy.
Yes.
Yes. Well, let's go ahead and move to our next question. I keep hearing this term, diversity burnout. Is that real? I heard that a little while ago. And how can someone get burned out over diversity? Joe, you want to go ahead and answer that one?
Well, I think we all universally have heard this, from industry colleagues, and just even people who are just simply, tweeting about it. So
Mm,
there's a wide range of ways to see how it's actually happening. And I'm hearing a lot of people who are in protected classes who get trotted out and the spotlight shown on them as if they're like a company mascot for inclusion. And
Mm-hmm.
they're just getting weary of it, and sometimes they're not even equipped, to do the things that their company is asking them to do because they've not been coached, they've not been trained, and so it puts them in an awkward position, and it's really quite unfair. So I would say that there are really two ways, to, I think, combat that. Sometimes leadership wants to do things, but they really just don't know what to do or how to do it. So someone needs to help them craft a committed and declarative statement, about what needs to be done and to put protections in place, for people. The second thing is that you do need capable and competent people leading, not just those who are emotionally charged, because we do know that if you have passion, but you don't have expertise, you will burn out. So I think it's very important to make sure that people, even that are in these roles, are getting training, they're getting, mentorship, and they are getting support.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good stuff.
Yeah, I love that, Joe. I would add endurance. So passion, expertise, and endurance. This is a long game. Like, this isn't a short sprint where you get to the finish line, in 10 minutes and say, okay, finish, we've checked that box. And burnout is a real thing. I've seen it, Tanya, diversity exhaustion, diversity burnout. And I agree with Joe that if you keep, as the employer or the DIE leader or diversity leader, anybody, if you keep picking the same people to represent all things diversity, those people get burned out because you start to feel like you are being used, if I'm just going to be frank. And there are a lot of other voices in your company of people that you can help equip, train, and help them share your message. So not just the same people over and over. Joe leads, she's an expert in talent acquisition. And one thing that came to mind, Joe, was when people are being selected for interview panels, they always pick the same group of diverse employees to sit on the interview panel. And they're tired. Like, they're really tired, and they'd like for you to pick someone else other than them. So train other people on how to interview who are also representing different diversity demographics. So that came to mind, just thinking about trotting people out as a mascot. The other thing I want to say, really on a different perspective about burnout, are the leaders. So the leaders who are carrying this mission, the DE&I leaders, the people manager leaders, diversity, equity, inclusion, and culture in particular, they're journeys. They're things that you constantly have to work on. And it can be easy to burn out if you come too fast out of the gate. So thinking about a race, if you just come out too fast, you're going to lose your wind at some point, and then you're going to end up being behind or exhausted or hit a wall. Diversity is the same way. So make sure that you are pacing yourself, because it is a journey, and you're not going to get to an end destination and then, pick up your marbles and go home. So keep that in mind.
And we have a couple of comments. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you. Alma was saying that was a great analogy about my life jacket. Thank you, Alma. Artie, excellent question. Thank you. And Vanessa Davis says, to help drive meaningful change, I'd love to see more mentorship and leadership development programs directly tied to efforts by DE&I teams, employee resource groups, and company leadership must be involved.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One company, a client that we're working with now, they have required all of their leaders to have a goal, a performance goal as part of their performance plan related to inclusion and belonging and culture. So not just diversity, kind of bringing them in the door. That can be measured. And if you are lacking in that area, certainly you should fish in a different pond for diverse candidates. But what happens when you get them? And so they have a performance goal around that, which I think really puts the medal right there. Like, it is like, you've got to own it because you're responsible and it's showing up in your performance plan.
That's good. Thank you, Vanessa. She also has another comment. Vanessa says, really great point, Cherie. We need a broader base of employees engaged in allyship.
Mm-hmm.
And Shatnese is here and says, hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for your comments. And feel free to ask any questions for our guests if you have any. So, was there anything else on diversity burnout? When you all were talking, I had this vision of like it's almost top heavy, like the top is diversity and it's all of this going on at the top, and then the bottom, and that's why they're getting burnt out because everything's up here and nothing is nourishing down here, all the other stuff that's going on. It's like, and the same people are at the top. That's what I kind of saw, and they're getting burnt out about it,
Yeah.
possibly.
Yeah, I think if you have an expectation that I'm in it for the long haul, like this is just not what I'm doing, but it's who I am. Like I like
Mm.
going from learning to doing to becoming. When it becomes and you got that ingrained in you, then it doesn't feel like work. But when you are just hustling and striving to check a box, it is going to feel like work and it's going to feel hard.
Mm. And what about the people that they find to just check the box? The first person they find, they feel they just put them in there because they need to check the box. That I'm
Yeah.
sure that's a whole nother issue.
That's a whole nother LinkedIn Live conversation. Absolutely. Yes.
Uh, Alma has a question. What are your thoughts about monetary incentivizing to help with the burnout? Mm.
So I'll say this, and Joe, I'd be curious to know your thoughts on this too. If you are rolling out diversity initiatives and you are being inclusive and asking for employee and leadership support to help implement these initiatives, I don't see anything wrong with being able to acknowledge and reward people. I'm not a fan. I think back to like when my kids were little, I wasn't a big fan of paying them to get good grades. Rewarding because I want them to intrinsically want to get good grades without me paying them. But certainly, if they had a banner school year, I'm going to do something to acknowledge and reward it. So I think about it from that standpoint. Like I'm not going to put out the carrot for you to participate in diversity and inclusion initiatives, but certainly recognizing your effort on the back end, I think is appropriate. Those are my thoughts.
And Joe, did you have some input on that as well?
Yes, I think that we also need to think about just how different a department, if you will, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, all of that is, and realize that the amount of emotion, that is invested in these things will really come under a wellness banner. And I
Mhm.
think that, to be able to think about proactively helping people through, rather than just waiting until they're burnt out,
Right.
but really being able to provide them with wellness initiatives and supports all along the way so they don't actually get to burnout. And if they are at burnout, you just need to bring out the fire extinguisher.
That's right.
That
I love it.
there, whatever it is that the
I love
ability
it.
to go hike a mountain, whatever it is, that they can just
Mhm.
refresh and recharge. And I feel like that's the best type of caring that we can provide, is really looking holistically at people who are carrying these burdens.
Great. Thank you. Let's go on. We got one more question we're trying to fit in, and I'll try and get a few more questions from our audience. But I think I really want to get to this question because I think it's really good. So there seems to be a debate about whether or not non-minorities, aka white people, can lead diversity programs as well as their colleagues who are minorities. What are your thoughts on that? White people leading diversity. Is that a good thing? Can that be done? And I think I should start with Joe on this one. So what do you think about that, Joe?
Okay, so in a way, it's like saying that unless you're a data scientist, you cannot recruit data scientists.
Mhm.
We all know that it has nothing to do with being a certain way, to be able to do a certain thing. For example, I actually went to interview a few years ago with a very major brand. It was a household brand name. And so one of the persons I had to interview with was, heading up the diversity, in that company. It was the first time they'd had somebody, in a role like that. So I was curious about like, okay, so, tell me about your background, what kinds of things did you do that they decided to hire you? Well, basically he met up with somebody at some happy hour or whatever. He's a Black man, and pretty much it became evident in what he shared was that they hired him because he was a Black man. And in 15 months, when I've asked about different initiatives and different things, it became evident that this person really didn't have any qualifications to do this job. And so that was something that was a concern, but it's not, atypical, unfortunately. And so I do have a really great example. There is a person by the name of Glenn Guttmacher. He's a very highly regarded and respected person in the sourcing community. And a few years ago, he started, I guess it was I don't know if it was a bi-weekly thing and it went to monthly eventually, but it's webinars where he brought in people, who were, because he's an advocate, who actually were achieving results, in the whole diversity and inclusion and equity arena. And these people were there and they inspired everybody. I think that there'd be, well over 100, 200 people who would attend these, and it would change, people, word got out or whatever. And so I would say that he did more to assist in educating and inspiring and informing people about this than, it was extraordinary. And so you can't say, white men can't jump or white men can't dance or whatever, right? These stereotypes, right?
Yes.
So I think that we definitely need to make sure that we're not being, racist when we're saying, white people can't do these jobs.
That's very interesting. Cherie, you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'll say it's yes and, right? So I agree with Joe, and I do think there is something to be said about lived experiences, right? Because you bring another perspective because you've sat in that seat or you've had that experience, you walked in those shoes, right? But I'm not saying that just people of color, BIPOC, are the only ones who have lived experiences. I heard someone say, if you have at least two people in a room, you have diversity. So even though two people might look exactly the same, I promise you there is some level of diversity, whether you can see it and it's obvious, you can hear it or not. There's diversity. And if you have the right heart and the right mindset to advocate on behalf of equality and equity, then I think you can do the job. Right? You've got to bring those two things. And that's not stuff that you can really train people or teach them. You have to bring that with you. So that's my thought. So I say yes and.
Okay. So let's pretend I'm white and I'm in charge of diversity.
Right.
Can you give some advice to me on what I should do? Or whoever wants to answer that.
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, if you are white and you're already in a diversity leader role, stop identifying in that way. Get rid of the imposter syndrome. If you are in that role, you have to know that you belong in that role if that's your desire. So if you are passionate, if you have the expertise and the endurance to drive these initiatives, then that's what really matters. And so let's take off that label of not being good enough or not feeling like you're up for the task. If you have a passion and maybe your expertise is not that much, go get some more, learn about it, educate yourselves. But every one of us has a responsibility if we're in a leadership role, especially in a diversity and inclusion or a culture role, to really give our best effort. And so that starts with shifting your mindset. So that's my 2 cents, Tanya.
Thank you. I almost was feeling some kind of way when I said that and said that to me. I don't,
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Like you felt like you were get it together.
That's right.
Joe, did you have anything on that?
Cherie, I just love that we are aligned and we have so much affinity, because my answer to this question was do not entertain imposter syndrome.
I love it.
I love it.
Do not be apologetic, and I think that there's I think that the position that people take sometimes is that they're constantly feeling like they have to be apologetic for being white. And it's like, don't do that. Just, walk your truth, inspire, educate, inform others. But here's the thing, you must lead by example.
Right.
People will follow by the example that you lead. And so the other thing that comes up all the time is accountability. So there should always be accountability. You hold yourself accountable first to be able to continue to learn, grow, and surround yourself with people who can advise you. And then people will see that we're only as good as our advisory council, and so these are the things that I believe will help to drive any initiative forward.
Very good. We only have 5 minutes left, but there's a couple of questions. I'm going to see how many we can get to in these last few minutes. Artie is asking, what are some of the ways companies can, I'm sorry, my screen just shifted on me. Hang on. There we go. What are some of the ways companies can push the envelope too much on DEI initiatives?
Ooh. So I'll jump in. I think pushing the envelope too much, that's the question, like going too far.
Too much on DEI.
Yeah. Mandating things without holding space for people to want to think differently and be differently. Diversity is not just what you can see and what you can hear, but as I mentioned, it's a whole cadre of things. It's like a melting pot of all sorts of different things. And if you only push one way as an organization, then you're going to be, in effect, consequences of you're going to be excluding somebody else. And so not mandating what diversity looks like in your organization, but really holding space for it to be whatever it's going to be organically. That's my thought.
Okay. Joe, did you also want to comment on that? Or are you good?
Yes. 7 years ago, I spoke at a conference where it was more like roundtable, and someone was there who was directing talent acquisition for one of the major defense contractors, in the DC area. And they shared how they were not permitted to hire anyone unless they had interviewed a Black person and a female for every single role. And I thought, who arbitrarily picked, race and gender, that was the definitive thing. And they did talk about how that challenged them, in terms of being able to have, even an equitable hiring process or whatever. And it was just, and so I think that you can draw artificial lines in the sand, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to increase or help any initiative that you might have. So I would go back to saying, for those people who say, oh, we just want to hire the best person. But if you're only just looking for people on LinkedIn, Indeed, guess what? That's not going to be necessarily all of the ponds you could be fishing from. So you're only going to maybe get the best from those two platforms, but not necessarily who are the best. It's like, fishing for farm-raised salmon, right? If you've never tasted wild caught, and you haven't gotten, wild salmon from Alaska or from the Nordic region or whatever, then you can't possibly know, what is out there. So I would highly recommend that people look at where are they getting their talent versus, who necessarily from these little tiny buckets, if you will.
Oh, I love that analogy because I love salmon. Anyway.
I had it for breakfast this morning. That's what made me think of it.
Very good. Well, we have 1 minute left. There's another question. Ladies, shall we go ahead? We want to stay true to our time, or do you want to take one more question?
I think if we have time, we can take one more.
Joe? Okay, we'll go ahead. It's 1:59. I'll hurry up. Okay. Shadanice is asking, what about empathy fatigue as a DEI professional?
Ooh. Joe, you want to take that one?
So empathy, I believe, is where you really have walked a mile in someone's shoes. And I would say that it's not just people who have done that, because I have relatives who are on the spectrum. I've never been on the spectrum, but I actually have had to walk through their journey with them. So then it's not necessarily empathy, right? But there's a fatigue there as well. So I think we need to be sure that we are identifying what it is exactly that, we're fatigued from, and not to just limit it to empathy, but also, for the fact that no matter where you're coming from, you can become fatigued just because you're carrying other people's burdens. And then always make sure that you're not taking on more than you need to take on. Find a way to deposit those burdens and get relief.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think what you said, Joe, is so important. There is a mental health and wellness aspect to diversity that people often forget about or overlook, and making sure that you've got the right level of self-care and the right level of wellness is really important when you're driving or even participating right in this work. So I think mental health is something that people don't talk enough about, in my opinion, as it relates to DIBE.
Great. Thank you both so very much. Great responses, great questions. Thank you all for the questions. You all were a great guest. You have to come back and see me again, because I have the feeling this conversation can be carried on to a part 2, a part 3, a part 4. It could just go on and without us getting fatigued at all, right?
I love that. Thank you, Tanya. And Joe, thank you. It's good to be
Thank
here.
you too. I will tell you that a lot of what I know, it comes from Torrin Ellis. If you do not already follow him, I believe that I have changed and grown, every other month, because he challenges me. And I would say, follow what he's doing. He also recommends the book, The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And so I think that those would be some good resources for people to carry out of this.
Thank you, Joe, for the resources. I was just going to ask that question. So in closing, Joe has given some great resources for diversity. Cherie, did you have any other resources or anything you want to add as well?
Really quickly, if you are looking to kind of check your own self, kind of put your own mask on before you help others, check out the implicit association test. And it was developed by Harvard University. So if you just Google IAT and Harvard, it'll come up and it'll give you a chance to really do some self-reflection. That way you can kind of check yourself before you go to help others.
Great. Thank you both so very much. And everyone who's watching now, or if you're watching this later, if you need help starting that diversity conversation, or you have a program you might need help with, we got you covered. You can contact HRKS. We'd be happy to help you. Go to our website and look us up at hrknowledgesource.com. Follow us on all our social media platforms. We'd love to hear from you. And be sure you keep watching The Radical Edge of HR. We are here monthly to talk about all these topics that make you sit on the edge of your seat. So with no further ado, I will say farewell to Cherie and Joe. Thank you again.
Thank you.
And goodbye, everybody. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Tanya. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.